Hello, everybody. Today we have a special guest. His name is Frank. He is a filmmaker and a researcher. And this episode is going to be part of the New Earth, New World Order series. This is going to be episode 8, my new favorite number. So this works out perfect. And I want to say thank you, Frank, for joining us. And today I want to get Frank's point of view, his information of all this stuff that's going on with the New Earth and the New World Order. He has some very interesting information that deals with Project Looking Glass, and I always thought that was interesting when I discovered about Project Looking Glass, about how there was two scenarios, a good scenario and a bad scenario. But the first place scenario was the good scenario, and it always made me wonder, did that have anything to do with the New Earth, humanity raising the vibration and so on? So I am so glad that Frank decided to come on board, have this interview and be part of the series. Frank, tell everybody what you do and what you want to share right now.
How you doing?
Good.
Yeah. Where do I start? You're
Well,
supposed to do all the introduction. I
I'll
don't have
keep it
much to
going,
say. I'm a
baby.
filmmaker. I made a couple of crazy films, about Mars and the sun and Venus even and the moon, stuff like that. Yeah. And I just, I've over the years morphed into various roles. Originally, I started off in the arts, namely, I was in music, and I felt the arts were a very powerful way to communicate information. And the original goal was to become, a famous rock star, and then just, sort of like slide in, messages into the music and do it that way. But,
Interesting.
as the music business is totally corrupt and full of Luciferians, I guess at some point it was destined that I was not going to be able to make my stellar rise in that medium. So I got into other areas, and I saw film as the other option, actually multimedia. But, film is kind of multimedia because it's a combination of images and music and text and information and emotions and things are, an excellent communication vehicle. So that's kind of the direction I went into. I made a brief pit stop as a VJ where I was trying to pioneer something called live cinema, which I thought was kind of cool because I started to develop software with a New Jersey company that allowed you to kind of create all these different scenes. And I thought, okay, instead of just putting wallpaper on the walls at disco clubs, I would actually go out and film scenes and create like these, like guerrilla films, and I'd put them directly onto the walls, take it directly to the people, sort of speaking. And that's kind of an interesting thing, and I think it has a lot of potential still. But then I got into the traditional form of making films and videos, and that led me to where I guess I am now, which is to make, to take ideas and go out and film them and cut them into decent looking documentary films if possible, combining all of my different skill sets that I've picked up over the years and delving into kind of crazy topics. I figured if I'm going to be going to the trouble to make a film, and it's a lot of work, then I would not approach it the way other documentary filmmakers have done it, because there's a lot of great documentary films out there, and they're usually associated with, dry, investigative, to the point, talking heads and a few pictures. And I wanted to make it kind of cinematic and make it an immersive experience and still have all that good stuff in it as well. So that led me to make Packing for Mars and also Solar Revolution. And I met along the way a out of place artifacts researcher by the name of Klaus Donna. So I helped him put together kind of a not so artistic, cinematic kind of a DVD, but something that gets the information out there, because he had nothing, and he was probably at that point one of the most well-known or respected UPARTS researchers in the world, and he had nothing out there. So we helped him do that. And, as it so goes, you end up in, I never really expected to land in the area of fringe science and secret space programs and all that. But because of the subject matter of Packing for Mars,
Mhm.
there was no way around it. I ended up getting into that whole scene, the disclosure stuff, ufology, and fringe science and quantum physics, and it was an amazing journey, and led me to the point where I learned a lot about these kinds of fringe sciences and fringe technologies. And in the course of my work together with Tony Maidenford on these films, we ended up in Europe and we connected with some interesting people, some scientists over here. One particular biophysicist that we made the film Solar Revolution with, and that relationship has become, has expanded so that we were talking about things like time travel and Looking Glass and all these things that were out there. And it wasn't until I saw, just through total fluke, one night I was on the web on Telegram, I think, and just kind of browsing a particular person's channel, which I normally never do because it's kind of chaos to go and filter through all those thousands of messages. But for some reason I was looking for something. I don't know what I was looking for. I don't remember. But then I saw this thing that said Looking Glass.
Mm.
And I'm like, what? This doesn't belong here. So because it didn't belong there and because it stood out like a peach in the pear tree, I clicked on it. And that led me to a YouTube channel of a particular group of individuals or people calling themselves Guardians of the Looking Glass. And for me, that was, of course, it meant more than it did to most people because I had some experience with Looking Glass, particularly with Bill Ryan and Carrie Cassidy. I think you mentioned the names earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I was familiar with that. The last time I'd ever heard of the material, it was over 10 years. So it was interesting that all of a sudden this group emerges 10 years later and lays out some pretty apocalyptic messages in a series of 3 videos. And the thing that was interesting about it was that their material was, I was familiar with the last, probably the one interview that most people know most about Looking Glass is the one that Carrie Cassidy published with a guy called Bill Wood,
Mm-hmm.
whose actual name is Brock Brader. So it's, it turned out that he was, using an assumed name.
Gotcha. To protect his
And that video was
name.
out there for a long time. And for most people take that video to be, the gospel, because I think people are kind of set on the idea of moving into the future and that there's going to be like an evolutionary leap of humanity and that it's all going to go good. And yet, and that's what Bill Wood's video was saying. He was basically saying that there are people that were dealing with the technology, this Looking Glass technology, which we can get into in a little bit more detail if you
Mm-hmm.
want. But the basic message was that, I'll just take a side jump here, that Looking Glass technology, for those who don't know, is a kind of technology that allows people to view timelines in a kind of a 3D holographic projection, if you will. So they can, and they can see into the future, more or less. They can't, they can't really directly do anything with that, but they can observe it. And then later with their observations, they were able to, they figured out that, now that we know that happened, what if we do this kind of thing? And they began doing that. In the Bill Woods version of that Project Looking Glass, those who were doing the what if were the black hats, more or less, deep state elites. And they figured out that no matter what they did at a certain point, they reached kind of a problem. And that problem was that it doesn't matter how much they tinkered, all the timelines at a certain point in time fused and merged into a singularity. And the outcome was always only one outcome. And that was unfortunately an outcome which was bad for them and good for the people, because the event that took place when that all merged, which was going to happen in December 21st, 2012, was this awakening of humanity. Now, that came and went, as we all know, and there wasn't an awakening of humanity. In fact, things have gotten a lot dire since then. And gotten worse and worse and worse, you could say, for those people who are awakening and who are eyes wide open looking at what's going on in the world. Well, along come these Guardians of the Looking Glass, and they laid out a different scenario. They said, yes, they were a group of insiders that had been working with that technology, and they had been witness to those future timelines, and they had seen some pretty, just earth-shattering, horrendous things that just shook them to the core. And because they were insiders and they had the scoop on the information, they decided a few of them amongst themselves decided to kind of steal away with a set of the data and figure out a way to maybe try to change what they saw. And so this is what we come down to here. This is the main difference between the Looking Glass Guardians and the Bill Wood version.
Okay.
Bill Wood says it was inevitable that we wake up and the dark side gets kiboshed. Well, the Guardians were saying that the odds were basically that the dark side saw no matter what they did, they were going to get their way. Their timeline was going to be the prevalent timeline, and the odds of that timeline were pretty much certain, except for one little curiosity. There were 3 years, in the year 2012, in the year 2016, and in the year 2022. They saw in their projected timelines that there was a branch off timeline, a rogue timeline from their perspective that led to their demise and led to the awakening of humanity. But so the group thought, okay, well, let's just see what happens. So 2012 came and went, nothing happened. They didn't come out. The officials working with the technology didn't make any announcements, didn't make any change to the timeline. 2016 came. They also never came out and made any big changes to the timeline or made any proclamations. And so here we were in 2022. And now these people felt, well, it's the last year where the timeline branched off, and they had to release, according to their data, they had to release this information at a certain point, and the only way to stop the timeline from ending up in the favor of the negative black hats was to open source the information about the potential future dark events which are standing on the horizon. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that caught my attention because I never really, for one, we didn't get the awakening, consciousness in 2012 like that, and B,
You think it might have been a slow awakening for 2012? Because I heard two stories that it was like a door opening awakening.
well, we'll
like
get
a
to
door.
that. We'll
Okay.
get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'll circle back. Just remember to remind me if I don't.
Will do.
But essentially, what happened is that for me, I just observed the world, and I can just simply by following, without even being psychic or a Palladian walk-in or anything like that, if I just follow my research and just logically think all the way through to their logical conclusion, the scenarios on the planet right now, the monetary system, the use of the type of energy that's being, used, fossil fuels and lithium and all these inferior forms of energy generation technologies, and immunizations, vaccinations that, the human body's not able to master, something which it has evolved for millions of years to actually handle, which is, viruses and bacteria and all these things are just part of nature. So all these three major things were all things that were described in these videos of theirs that were going to have a major impact on the future and to increase the probability of the negative timeline to come to pass. That made far more sense to me personally than just to kind of like, according to Bill Wood, which was to just kind of sit back. And if you want to, if you can improve yourself or meditate or do anything like that, great, it's going to make it easier when it happens. But that it was inevitable. And for me, that was very dangerous because the thought was that, the thought came to me that, well, what if this guy was sent in deliberately by the black hats to give that message to everybody, especially people in the New Age community, in the awakening community, so that they have this idea that, hey, it's inevitable. We're all going to end up evolved in this new consciousness timeline, and so I made a point right then and there, first of all, to watch to see if anybody's going to put anything out about these videos, because it was pretty like apocalyptic, and I was looking for the usual players to come out and write about it, many of them that I know, but nobody was coming out. So I decided, okay, look, if this is real, I need to publish it. I need to put it out there because it's all about getting a lot of people simply to look at it and talk about it. And that alone, if there's so many people, there's a critical mass of people. It's like the spoiled birthday party, surprise birthday party, It's just, if you tell the birthday kid there's a party waiting for him at home, then the surprise is gone. So the idea was to get as many people talking about the surprise, fake, false flag operations which were planned, and then it would obviously force the other side to back off and stop their plans. And so, this was the motivation for me publishing it, and I didn't really think much other than I'll put it out. I put it out on a German platform, and within hours, though, I got a call from from John Nolan and Inspired Channel, who by chance happened to stumble on.
That's
We
the video
both
I saw.
share, German connections. Yeah, hey John, and so he happened to stumble on that news platform, that portal, just by fluke. He doesn't usually go on it, but and there was my article, bang, and he immediately called me, and then we scheduled a talk, and for the following couple days, and we did this talk, and it just like went viral. It just blew up. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were tuning into the message. And so I realized then at that point, and this pertains to the point you mentioned earlier, this gradual awakening. What I realized at that point was that I think humanity at this point has gone through so many things, so many really crazy boundary drawing things in life, precedent setting, the buck stops here kinds of things, that a critical mass of people have reached a point where they're thinking, even people that weren't necessarily conspiracy theorists,
Hmm.
like to call us, right? People that are researchers are automatically conspiracy theorists.
Correct.
Yeah, so I realized that there was a critical mass of people that were interested in this topic, and that were resonating with the idea that it was all about us creating our timeline actively, that we couldn't just sit and passively wait for the timeline to happen because of cosmic events, but that, yes, there is a cosmic event coming, and yes, there has been already activation in the solar system, which we covered in our film Solar Revolution, which was one of the reasons why, for me, the message of the Guardians of the Looking Glass resonated so much, because I did understand that there was an acute raising of energies and frequencies in the immediate environment of our galaxy, hitting us that have never hit us before. And these are specifically the kinds of radiations and rays and waves and frequencies that are deliberately tuned to trigger and stimulate us as biological beings. And that we seem to have arrived at a certain point in evolution that this is affecting us in a way that could actually lead to a quantum evolutionary leap in consciousness, one like we've never had before. There's always been little leaps, and there's been rises and falls of civilization. We've all heard of Atlantis and Lemuria and some of these others, but in the end, it's always returned us to the same, reset, and we're back to the Stone Age, with cave drawings, and getting back to our iPhones, So this may have happened already quite a few times, but it's like now it seems like this is again a point in this cycle where we have this chance to catapult, but this time is really different. And so what happened in 2012 that Bill Wood was alluding to, which he didn't really describe very well, was that yes, are these frequencies coming at us, and yes, there is kind of a window opening, which is a window of time where we are being stimulated by this extra juice out there, if you might want to call it that, which is tuned to our consciousness as human beings. But that we do need to know that this is happening, and nobody was really talking about it. It was like after 2012 happened, everyone just thought, okay, well, it didn't happen. And I know many people that just kind of went and did a nosedive and gave up on a lot of stuff with consciousness because there was so much hype around it, right? Everyone was like
Correct.
hyping it, and nothing happened, right? So a lot of people jumped ship, and there's a lot of people that are still waiting for something to happen. But what we don't know really is the science behind it. And so what I decided to do is started going into my notes in the past and doing all the research and comparing it to what we talked about in Solar Revolution. And so indeed what the Guardians of the Looking Glass were talking about was like hitting it right on the money. I mean, they were talking about something which was real. And their perspective that the timeline was actually predominantly focused in favoring the negative people made absolute sense, because you look around at you, we have a timeline right now that's leading us toward a world of transhumanism, of artificial humans, of an event horizon where artificial intelligence will make the leap to become recognized as a intelligent, sentient being, and that'll only be a couple of steps before humanity 1.0, us, the organic beings, are going to be slowly pushed off until we're extinct. I mean, this could be the last real generation of real humans that we have on the planet. and there's the people behind it, like the Yuval Hararis and Klaus Schwabs, and all their artists, the Peter Gabriels and the ones we love, but they're still pitching it to the World Economic Forum, all this great technology, and that we're heading toward this future of technology. Well, it was a technocratic society based on data. It wasn't a society based on the values that that we actually haven't even really fulfilled. We haven't realized a stable monetary system, a non-hierarchical government, a free form of energy generation that's free for everybody. We haven't done that. And yet here they were, slamming us down the highway toward their transhumanist future. And who was there to stop them? Really? Because the news is talking about it, the films are talking about it, and so I thought what the Guardians of the Looking Glass did was a big favor, kick us in the butts and say, wait a minute, the guys, are you aware that there's this timeline thing? There's this timeline war going on. And there are certain people that are in charge of that timeline, and they're not just going to let up. They've been working on that damn thing for over 100 years. They're not just going to go away. And they're not just going to pretend that someone that's coming along, like a Trump or something, was a surprise. They've seen this stuff coming. And they've, in fact, you could even argue that Trump was put in there by them, So it's like, if you want to be the opposition, if you want to beat the opposition, be the opposition. It's the old Lao Tzu, art of war. So all this stuff has to be taken into consideration, because we as awakening people, as awakening, light activists, have to be upping our game too. We can't just be, like woo-wooing our way into the Enlightenment. So the other, and they actually had numbers. They were saying the prognosis of the probability of the negative timeline in 2022 is, leaving 4.9% probability of the good positive timeline from happen. And so the only way to change those odds was to start manifesting or thinking about the fact that we could manifest our own positive timeline, and to stop participating in the things that are giving the negative timeline energy. All those things, we can think of many things here, that are fueling that, that negative prognosis. And so that's what the message really, in a nutshell, has been all about since the very beginning of when I discovered that YouTube channel.
For Guardians of the Looking Glass, so they have their own YouTube channel posted with videos?
Right. They have YouTube, they have Rumble, Brighteon.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a few. And then they had their videos, of course. There's been it's been a whole saga. Today they released another video, actually.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay. I wasn't too sure. I didn't know that their videos were on YouTube as well. I thought they were posting on a certain message board or a certain website. So I'll have to go check that out as well. Did 2030 come up with anything? Because on the metaphysical stuff.
Now you're getting into some of the details, like the things that caught my attention on the Looking Glass Guardians video text and things were the year 2030.
Okay.
And in there, and this is a very pivotal year. It's a pivotal year for a lot of reasons. It's a pivotal year for Agenda 21, because 2030 is one of those milestone years. It's a pivotal year, from the perspective of the Looking Glass Guardians. It was the year where the cosmic event happened. So, and the two scenarios that they painted, there was one scenario where the way that the elite were going to try and prevent our timeline from manifesting was to get us all hooked on vaccines and just keep, pumping them into us year after year. Would play a detrimental role, because when we would reach the 2030 point, and then the event would happen. And instead of it being a positive event where we just kind of shoot, into another dimension in a way, because of our particular chemistry, it would actually switch us off, to the point where people would literally switch off, like drop dead. And a certain amount of people, which they were saying were about 500 million, would, somewhere around that number, would survive. It would mathematically worked out so that at least 500 million would survive, and then there would be 1 million of the elites that would be in charge of those others, that would be like their slave race. And if you look at that number, 500 million, where have we seen that before? Have you heard of something called the Georgia Guidestones?
I got it right here on my notes.
Exactly. So there you go. There's those numbers again, right? So there's all these like sync points, and we have to look at those. Regardless of what the Guardians of the Looking Glass are. There were people that thought they were just psyops, and Then there were people that thought they were just a crypto scam, and then there were people that thought they were just evil, and that their messages, because we think about them, are going to make them happen. But if you analyze all those points one at a time, you realize that none of that really can apply. Or, certainly the idea that if us talking about something which could be a negative scenario creates it, this isn't true. There are people out there that are going to practice and create negative scenarios, whether we want to believe in it or not. One thing people don't understand is there are certain beings on this planet that don't share the kind of empathy that we have, that don't share in love and trying to expand and raise consciousness. No, they're manipulators, and they're specifically here for that purpose, and they're going to do their thing. And regardless of whether we focus on it. And so those people could be the ones that are, if you look at these people at these gatherings, these great reset gatherings, they're you got to say,
the craziest things, man.
they're superficial. They're not talking about the stuff that you and I are talking about right now. They're not talking about the deeper implications of things. It's all very, very superficial. And they have an obligation, if they were really caring about humanity, they would have an obligation to hit the mainstream and start to educate us about the coming future. And that's, let's just say that it's inevitable that we end up in an artificial intelligence dominated planet. If you listen to Geordie Rose talk about the D-wave quantum computers that he was building back over 12, 13 years ago, or even longer. And, he was coming out 10 years ago describing the coming change to society as a tsunami, something that is going to shock us like a tsunami would physically. And it's going to be something which, we'd have to prepare for. And he likens it to the experience of some aliens reached out and called us from 50 million light years away and said, "Hey, dudes, we're coming to Earth. We're going to land, in 30 years. Can you guys get ready so that when we land, everyone isn't going to drop over and drop dead out of shock?" And now it's the day before they arrive, and have we been told? No, we haven't been told. Nobody's telling us about this stuff. Nobody's telling us about the real implications. And we hear Yuval Harari talk at the World Economic Forum about the useless class, which is, we've heard that word useless eaters before. This is kind of a milder form of it, I guess, useless class. What he's saying is that the technology and artificial intelligence is going to rise so quickly and become so prevalent that even people that have normal jobs that, maybe get a new job and retrain themselves are even still not going to be able to keep up, because after a couple of years, even the job they retrained from is going to be obsolete. So we're going to become useless in the sense that what are we going to do, right? We've got no jobs that they can't do better. They don't need us for the money because the robots are doing all the work and they're getting the money from it. So, we don't have the jobs, we don't have, what are we going to do? Sit at home, watch television all day? What's the point? What is our purpose? What is the purpose of humans? So who's talking about that?
It kind of goes along to what Elon Musk was saying about like you were saying with the jobs and artificial intelligence and so on, that it probably comes down to, they mentioned the basic income salary, where everybody has a basic income because of what you're saying, no jobs, nothing like that. Now I wanted to circle back to those dates, whether it's 2022 or 2030 or even 2016 you mentioned. Do you think that was part of not like evolution, but also just part of the awakening of humanity? Because when 2016 happened, a lot of people started awakening on both sides because there was a change in the political system. And I want to reference Dolores Cannon when she was talking under hypnosis. One of her clients said that one of the first systems that need to fall is your political system needs to fall because it's corrupt, and too many people at power just have abusive power right now. So do you think when they were talking about 2016 and 2022, because there's about to be another change as well, you think that has anything to do with it?
Well, I think that the date of 2012 and the whole idea that there's this, influx of frequency and cosmic radiation coming at us has more to do with anything than dates. I think the dates are interesting from the perspective of what the Looking Glass data showed. Those were specific years in which a a branch off was seen in the actual timelines. And I've seen this kind of work, and I covered it. I've created a kind of a webinar that dives deep into this whole thing. It's like 6 hours of like in-depth
I heard.
science behind it and all that stuff. And you know, there's part of that you see. I'll show you like some of the research done in Russia on timelines, and so timeline splits happen, and they happen, you know, and they, because essentially we're on a consensus timeline. All of us have agreed to come here right now on this consensus, and we have the option through the way we resonate with that consensus timeline to affect it. We can either be drawn to it, or we can create another kind of resonance. And you know, with if and it's even better if more of us together create that unified resonance that begins to pull energy away from the consensus timeline and start to create, you know, a new kind of consensus timeline. This kind of stuff is what's actually going to choose whether or not we make the evolution. Yes, we do need a political. We need to look at the political system honestly, because you know what we have is we have really just, you know, corporations and, you know, kind of like mini dictatorships running and dictating agendas and policy on the planet based on the will and, you know, desires of very, very few people. And we have a vast, entertainment complex which has been designed to lull us into a version of seeing reality according to those that are pulling the strings on where they want us to go, that are also tuned into that timeline that they're moving us toward. And then we have the whole rewriting of history element too. We've all heard of fake news. And, you know, because people are waking up, you know, more and more now, and every year that passes, people are, you know, COVID probably was, you know, the thing that shook people the most out of anything. I know most people say it's Trump, but I just think that was part of a ramp, you know, and the COVID thing was much more dynamic than any of this, because that was like really pushing it to the point of like the last barrier of entry is your skin and your freedom to choose what you want to have put inside of your body. And
Correct.
so, you know, so we began to look at things like fake news, but, you know, by extension, you know, I can make a good case for you that most of history is completely fake. And so, you know, most people, even people that are awakened, they go back to, you know, to reference certain events in history as examples of where there was a bad civilization. And I can show you that even what they think has been manipulated, you know, that, you know, so if you're basing your future and your direction on information that's been manipulated, then, you know, you're just, again, you're taking away your own energy instead of seeing what the illusion is and letting it, and just seeing it for what it is and letting it crumble. You're still going to be carrying that baggage around. You're still going to be thinking the same, you're going to be projecting the same negative cycle and loops that were injected into those fake history timelines. You're going to inject them into your future timeline because those are patterns. You know, we need to see the patterns and we need to break those patterns, or we're going to be stuck in the pattern. We're going to carry that pattern with us to wherever we go into the future. So, you know, what I think what Dolores Cannon is getting at here is, you know, yes, the democracy, okay, which, you know, Plato even already warned us that democracy is the worst form of government there is. But, you know, the idea of like that, the majority of people choose their destiny, of course, that's a great idea in principle. And it would be great. But, you know, the problem is people have been, like I said, they've been miseducated. They've been falsely educated. Their basis of judgment from which to make decisions, even to vote on a subject, is completely off. So you have to get to a certain maturity level, intellectually, emotionally, and also to see through the garbage before you're even able to make a proper decision about what government form is actually the one to move into. I mean, ultimately, the ultimate form of government, they call it, is anarchy, which is simply there's no government. You know why? Because people are evolved enough to go, okay, well, we don't need government anymore. And they talk about those extraterrestrial civilizations or the inner Earth civilizations where there's no government. Well, they seem to have manifested that, let's say, you know, if they're real. And so, you know, but that is up to us. We have the responsibility of seeing and recognizing who we are. We had people like Jesus here, you know, that were telling us, like, I am a son of God. And the Roman Catholic Church and the King James Bible converted it into, I am the Son of God. You know, big difference, right? So if you're a son of God or the son of God, so we've pedestalized Jesus to the point where he's on a throne, unattainable, instead of realizing that, hey, he was there to point the way. He was just 2,000 years ahead of us, all of us waking up now. And so if we put him on a pedestal, we're going to give away our power instead of going, wait a minute. He was there showing us what we're all capable of doing. So let's just do it. All right. And so that's what we need to actually be doing, is recognizing who we are. And part of that whole process is to see through all this garbage and drop it, and that's what I thought the Guardians of the Looking Glass were good at provoking. They really kind of put the garbage out there in our face to have to confront it. So I think
Right.
I look at it as completely the opposite as most people. I see it as a positive thing, because looking at something as a positive thing. It's not a negative. Yeah, it's like being honest with yourself. If you want to be a guitar player, and you think you're going to be good, and then one day you meet someone who's really good, and you realize, okay, I'm not going to be a guitar player. Nothing wrong with that. You can just be honest to yourself and forget the guitar and move on. So this is what I'm getting at.
Now, in those videos, did they go into specifics of like what to do and what we need to do for the positive timeline, or did
Well,
they
what they were
go into
talking
like a
about doing
broad?
was, yeah, was sharing the information and talking about it. Simple as that. Get it out there. Talk about these specific events. They were showing us specific, in the early videos, they showed us specific false flag events that were going to happen, or that had been planned, let's just say. And then we had an option to, just to ignore it. And, in which case it's likely that it could have gone down. Or we could have started talking about it with many, many people. And then the probabilities of it happening would go down, because, like I said earlier, that analogy with the spoiled surprise birthday party, they just can't do it then if too many people are looking. And then they have to readjust their plan. As soon as they readjust their plan, they're changing the probabilities of their timeline. Suddenly, they have to work more. They have to work harder now because we've kiboshed their plan. So, yeah, they've been set back. So, plan B for them, right? And plan B, may not work. And then if plan B doesn't work, it's plan C. So they gave us a couple of plans. One of them was this false flag attack in New York City, a bombing. Another one was, which was going to lead to like a horrendous whole exchange with Russia, which seemed all too real at the time, because look at what's going on in Russia right now, with America. And I mean, it's a de facto war going on right now already. It's already a proxy war happening in Russia. We just don't. I mean, in
Right.
Ukraine, we just don't. We're just not calling it out yet for what it is. And
Correct.
then the other event was, there was a particular Dr. Winston Wu. He was a quantum physicist, a crypto scientist, and he was figuring out a way to hack the crypto system before it goes down and generate lots of money so that we could take that money and inject it into working on the ground at you could say funding like a political party, or putting money into technology, that to new technologies like free energy technologies and all these things. Like, one of the things that's holding us back a lot of times is we don't have the money. I mean, I'm sure you've got lots of ideas that you'd love to have happen, but you
A
have a
few.
day job, right? And I got a job too. And we all have jobs, so we can't just be focused on this stuff full time. But these other people, these
Mhm.
these Klaus Schwab gang people, they've got all the money they need. Money isn't an issue. So,
Correct.
this guy was going to try to level the playing field. So it was a great idealistic idea, and they were going to try and kill him. And then they tried to kill him on a certain date. That date came and went, and there were some interesting communications. And then about, I don't know, I think 10 or 14, 15 days later, it went down and he went black. And there was a final message that the military was surrounding his compound, and that was the end of it. And he's disappeared. And then, of course, people freaked out and said, "Oh, it was us, a crypto scam, blah blah blah." But the Guardians have continually resurfaced, so they've come back now with a couple of more videos since then, and they're indicating that there's more events coming. There's more things, information dumps, data dumps that they're going to be sharing with us. So it's going to be interesting to see how things are evolving.
And with you being a filmmaker, I already saw two of your videos so far. So I saw Packing for Mars, and I saw your other video that you made with Secret World. Anything with Atlantis, Lemuria, Crystal Skulls caught my attention. So I hurried and watched that one out, got that out the way. I know you're a busy individual, and I know in your interview, things are moving so much faster. Do you plan on making a video as well about this subject, about this?
Well, for me, the video was the webinar, because I realized
Okay.
making a film takes too long, and
Hmm.
this was the solution. And in fact, it's actually probably better than a film because it's really like a full 6 hours of like deep dive, and I cover stuff that it just, I mean, it's mind blowing because going back into the material really opened up a lot of things for me. Things like I made some connections to things that I'd found out about during the packing for Mars filming days, which I had, which were kind of, they ended up not being put into the film, and they were just sort of sitting out there. And then going back now, I realized that some of the interviews that I'd made and some of the people that we talked to were saying things about exactly what's happening relative to the Looking Glass material the Looking Glass Guardians released, and to what the whole Looking Glass history was all about. It goes back a long time. It goes right back to the 50s, and 60s, and the J-rods and the
Wow.
whole chapter of, of these crashes that began happening with Roswell. It gives the whole thing a far more, it ties it all together. I mean, it's just, I've never had anything that has tied so many things together like this. Is wraps it all up, and it makes total sense to me. Now, there might be other ETs out there, we've heard about them, but for the most part, a lot of those, are people's stories. They've never actually produced like on a talk show, oh yeah, here's my Arcturian buddy, come on in and sit down, let's talk about Arcturus. No, they haven't. They've just channeled it or claimed, to be in touch, or said they were walk-ins or whatever. I mean, and this might be true, I mean, it could very well be true, but there's no real hard evidence of any of it. And so this was the first time that I actually had connected the dots that actually had hard evidence, because there were documents that had surfaced that had been legitimized by forensics analysts that described this chapter of the Looking Glass that led to the Looking Glass. And when you put all those dots together like this, it's clear what's going on. And Linda Moulton Howe, her part fits in too. The whole abductions, the whole, that this whole program that's been happening for the last, well, okay, she says it's been happening millions of years, maybe. But this particular cycle has to do with what's happening in the cosmos coming up on us in we don't know the exact, I hate putting dates on stuff.
I know what
2030,
you
yeah,
mean.
maybe. But it's inevitable because I actually go into the whole science of catastrophism. And we go into the work of Charles Hapgood, and we realize that there was a time in the 50s and 60s where this information was highly discussed. Velikovsky, these were all people that were taken seriously about cosmic eruptions and changes in the solar system and planetary alignment changes, and all this stuff has a basis in reality, and it was well documented. People like Admiral Byrd went down to Antarctica and brought back evidence of polar shifts and things like that happened in cycles. And then along came, a CIA operative posing as a geologist and wrote a phony baloney, cataclysm book. And Einstein wrote the foreword, and it was quickly debunked. And that was the end of that whole thing. And his other manuscript, which was the real one, was classified by the CIA. So you end up with none of that happening. We don't talk about it anymore.
That's interesting.
Right? And so all of this comes up again when you look back at the whole Looking Glass history, which I cover all of that in that webinar. Yeah, it's a lot of material. But it's interesting because it gives you the full picture it gives you a clearer picture of reality.
And all that information that you mentioned is inside the webinar that you mentioned?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if someone's interested in the webinar, how can they access it?
Yeah, they should just go to I have a website called cyberhive.tv.
Okay.
You can put a link in your thing, cyberhive.tv, and then there you'll see there'll be webinar at the top, or you can just go to my website, frankjacob.com, and there's links to the CyberHive website there too. But it's hosted on the CyberHive website, and you can join up there, and there's a community. You can sign up for a newsletter if you just want to do that, and you can get into the discussion there. It's kind of a new platform I've created as a result to open my big mouth when I did my first interview with John Nolan about a webinar, and then I actually had to do it because like hundreds of people wrote me and said, oh yeah, we want to do a webinar. So like I had to do it. So I did it. It was painful. It took a month. But
Perfect. Yes,
but
yes.
I never could have made a film in a month, but I made a pretty amazing webinar in a month.
I will check it out. Any links that we talk about will be in the description below to make it easier for everybody. And I look forward to checking it out as well. You mentioned J-rods. Can you go into that briefly in case someone doesn't know what that is?
Sure. The J-rods are the name given to particular extraterrestrials, which they were captured in the beginnings like starting in 1947, we've all heard of the Roswell crash. Well, there was many other crashes, up to about, I think in total 7 different crafts were captured, and within some of these craft, survivors were captured. And those survivors, they thought they were extraterrestrials, meaning, aliens. But as it turned out, the J-rods that they were capturing were saying something very confusing to them, and that was that they were time travelers who had come back in time to this particular point of time because this was when the timeline split. Interesting coincidence, right? Timeline split. And what happened last time around was there was a catastrophic split, and the catastrophe set in. And the catastrophe pushed us underground, pushed us, it crashed civilization. And tens of thousands of years later, a faction of these humans left the planet, went to the moon, they went to Mars, they went on to Reticulum. And so what happened is that, these particular, and they had names for them, they had classifications for them. They were a particular group of future humans that were called P45s, meaning that they were from 45,000 years in the future. But there were also a second group of future humans that were 7,000 years their ancestors, or sorry, their descendants. They were called P52s, from 52,000 years in the future. And the P52s had somehow developed kind of an empathy, and they all knew that this particular moment in their history was when the timeline split that led to the P45s. And the P45s look like those little gray aliens with the buggy eyes, and they're short. What they are, what you're looking at there is humans that have mutated through, thousands of, centuries of mutation that led to the developing a horizontal evolution, shrinking in size, the eyes changing, the mouths, everything changing, telepathic abilities developing. And so the P45s, however, were considered the rogue element of the J-rods because they were here to ensure they liked it the way it was. They were happy with their timeline that they ended up on, and they were here actually just to harvest genetic material for them to take back to their timeline and fix some of the genetic mutations which they'd been suffering from. They didn't want to change anything. And these are the descendants of the Illuminati, as it's described. And they're the second group, the P52s, were the empathic, compassionate ones, and they were here to try and awaken us to the reality that there's a split coming, that there's this cataclysmic event happening, and that we can do something to affect it with our consciousness. Now, science out there now, and is really starting to prove the fact that we actually can, not just passively get, energized from the cosmos, but that it's actually a two-way street, that we are actually connected to the cosmos as well. And through our realization of that, we can begin an interplay with the cosmos, so that there's a chance that when this potential pole shift comes, that it won't cause the planet to shift, it won't cause the actual disruption of society, and that it'll actually potentially cause this evolutionary jump. And they actually describe it in the documentation, which they eventually, over the decades of communication with the group of the group of people that they were talking to, many people might recognize this name. They were called Majestic. And Majestic had many jobs, and most of it had to do with covering up alien technology and all this stuff, secret projects, black ops, etc. So one of their tasks, Majestic 12, exactly. Okay. So one of the tasks was to basically explore this J-Rod thing, and in the course of their dialogues with the J-Rods, they uncovered all this information. They uncovered the information about the sentient nature of human beings, the ability of us to transcend certain levels of consciousness and actually activate ourselves in tandem with the universe. They documented this stuff decades ago. And what's cool is you look at this document, that was written like over 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and it's got language in it which does not fit in that time period at all. Because I was around in that time, I was into consciousness stuff, but nobody was talking about this stuff, and nobody would have understood it if we were talking about it. It only came about in the last 10 years or so that we began to think about the cosmos and the radiation and the cosmic events, and that it could affect consciousness and stuff. And I mean, our film Solar Revolution is still the defining film on that whole subject, and it's over 10 years old already. That shows you how little is being talked about it. And that
That's my
film was
next
just as
one.
current now as it always been. Yeah, you got to check it out. It's
That would
like,
be my next film I'm going to check out.
yeah, yeah, and there's so much in that film. I mean, one of the guys in that film, Michael Persinger, he's just a genius. Unfortunately, he left the planet, a couple of years
Mm,
back, but he was one of the guys that was involved in developing, not only exploring technology that had to do with consciousness and brain waves and microcurrents and how they affect us. He created something called the God helmet. You could Google that and check out some of the work he did. But he also, was a pioneer in showing us that, basically the people that are in charge of all these science projects, these black ops projects, discovered quite a while back that they can affect each one of our brains through radiation from satellites and from orbiting technology all around the planet. They can do mind control experiments with us, and they have been doing mind control experiments on us. So, once you know all this stuff, it helps you because you can help to decipher. You can begin to break through this distortion I was talking about earlier, the historical distortion, all the stuff that you thought was true. You can begin to question that stuff in a healthy way, and find ways to, to tune into what's truthful. Yeah.
interesting. Man, you got so much knowledge. Whew, you just wealth of knowledge.
Well,
For
that's been
the
about 30 years.
Yeah, that's why I'm so glad you came on, and I'm so glad to meet you and talk to you. For the J Rods, and you mentioned the Greys as well, and I'm going to reference Sarah's work, Sarah Brissman Cosme. So, and I've heard it from other individuals as well when they talk about the Greys, how the Greys say they're us in the future, and what Sarah discovered, true, they're us in the future, but technically we look like them in their past. So
Yeah, exactly right.
a million years ago or so, we're humans, and then they left their planet for whatever reason because of some kind of destruction that they had. They had to leave their planet, and those humans at that time stayed in space, and they started working on how to replace their limbs, bioengineering, how to live longer, and they bypassed everything. They could live for thousands and thousands of years, and so the question was, well, why do they look the way they look? And it was a simple response, and it said, well, you'll look like a gray too if you lived in space for a million years. And I was like, that was very interesting. That was kind of like an
Good
aha
answer.
moment.
Good
So
answer, exactly. And that's kind of what the J-Rods describe it, the P-45s and
okay.
52s. They were subjected to radiation, space radiation, and they were traveling into space vast distances. They exposed themselves to that stuff, and it mutated them. It caused, in fact, Jan Burish, who's one of the key principal, main characters in the whole story of the Looking Glass, was working with the J-Rod to deal with neuropathy, which was something that had, it was a problem. They had a skin problem and, a glandular problem that had developed as a result of this exposure that they were actually trying to help them to alleviate. And they,
Mm.
and of course they were, pretty poor because they were kept in captivity. And in the end, Dan Burish helped the J-Rod return to his time and his people. He pushed him into the Stargate. And because they kept them, like, I mean, they didn't allow them to wear clothes. Some of those details are really kind of tragic, what they put them through, because the P-52s did really want to help us. And what's interesting, another faction comes out, is that you realize that there's another group that neither the P-45s or P-52s knew about, and those were the P-52 Orions. And the Orions they're like the Nordics. They look like the Nordics. They're tall. They have whitish hair. They have big blue eyes. And they're us. They were the spiritual side of humanity when the catastrophe happened. And they went under and they survived, but they went to Orion. And they had a different future. I mean, their future, but they were also back here because they all had access to this looking glass technology, which is what they used to travel with, to time travel. And, this is what they're doing at CERN. They're
Mm.
using the technology
Right.
that they gained from these crash disks that they got in the 40s, and they've ramped them up to the size of CERN. So, I mean, I've just been getting some very new information about what's really going on at CERN from some of the science leads that I have, some scientists over here that are connected to whistleblowers and people that are on the inside that know information about CERN that nobody knows about. and you realize that CERN is, this is like a huge portal, like a huge Stargate, an artificial Stargate that they're playing with. So they can travel, and they have traveled, and they will travel, and so, yeah, and the only question is who's in charge of the technology, right? And the last time, obviously it didn't go so well for us because they're back here, and the Orions came back because they're saying, they actually gave the humans a gift, which was called the Orion Cube, and it was supposed to be intended for them to help avert potential disasters in the future, and it was supposed to be shared with all of humanity. But what happened is, as usual, a certain faction in the government absconded with the technology, took it underground, ended up being used only for military black ops projects, and then we never saw the light of day. The story is that that there's this international committee out there in the world that superseded the Majestic 12, and they began working with the cube, and they disassembled it because of the Stargates and all this other stuff. It's another story, but it's interesting because the Orions were essentially the more evolved form of all of the J-rods that were back here, and they really are here to and they actually enforced a treaty on both the P-45s and the P-52s. And the P-45s, being the rogues that they are, reluctantly went along with the treaty, but are constantly breaking the treaty or not listening or adhering to it. And of course, there are certain factions of humans that are enticed away by the lure of super incredible technology and age extension and all these other things that allied with the rogue J-rods that are not adhering to the treaty. And those are the people that have taken in charge of this timeline that we're on. Because the timeline that we're on right now, the consensus timeline, is not leading us to a place that is going to become that place where humans are going to realize their ultimate form of existence. They're not, the ultimate form of human existence is not to merge with machines.
Correct.
To stick wires in our brain. We don't need that. The very fact that you'd have to stick something in your brain, you're already perfect. There are certain elements in our DNA that have not been unlocked yet. There are faculties and abilities that we haven't even tapped into. So this is the timeline we need to be on. And anybody that's trying to sell us on a transhumanist timeline, they're taking us down a timeline that's going to be the extinction of us. So, and you cannot tell me that you can go and look anywhere on the planet where the transhumanist timeline is not peaking. And COVID is like another example of how they showed people would listen to anything that they're told to do. They will even allow a government entity to violate, their own personal boundaries and force them to inject, let's just say, what do we say to be safe here? An experimental, vaccine
Flavors
into their bodies. So, who does that, right? They always quote, Nuremberg, the Nuremberg Code, Nuremberg was a joke. Yeah, I mean, really, but that's another subject.
Yeah.
They never cared about Nuremberg. They never meant it. It was, it had a whole different purpose, which has to do with this whole fake history thing I talked about before.
Right.
That's why nobody adheres to the Nuremberg Codex. It's a joke. And doctors that think it's, it's like, forget it, man. The answers are elsewhere. Yeah, the answers are very sobering, but they require us to wake up and stop being kids and talk about all these things like adults and look at the hard facts and look, there's been free energy technologies developed in the how far do I want to go back? 1931, Nikola Tesla had a car, that drove on magnetic energy resonance from the environment. No motor, right? Articles about that. 1954, Friedrich Lülling, German guy, had a magnetic motor, perfectly patented. He had already had building plans to put it in production for cars, for motors.
Mm-hmm.
Next year came, they took it off the market. 1989, Audi had a diesel motor that drove 4,000 kilometers on one tank of gas. Next year, they were going to go into production. Never saw that one come out. Who did we got? Otis T. Carr, right? Ralph Ring. Those guys developed technology that, in the 1950s in the United States, actually Otis T. Carr was a protege of Nikola Tesla, and he developed, flying saucer technology. We could have had a totally different reality right now. And hey, our politicians should be looking at this going, wow, man, like all we hear about is, Greta Thunberg clobbering us over the head, like carbon, we're sinners, right? Well, hey, man, The solutions have been out there for over 100 years.
Absolutely.
So let's why don't we take the 10 top promising technologies that existed, and Elon Musk, instead of paying 44 million for Twitter, why don't you take maybe 44 billion, sorry, why don't you take 4 billion of that, just 10% of that, and create a campus for free energy development, and I guarantee you in 2 years we'd have working prototypes. And that would be the end of the banking system, which is based on the oil system. It would be the end of the oil system as we need it. We don't need all that oil anymore. We can use oil for lubricants, but we don't need to use it for burning our, fossil fuels. It'd all be finished, over.
Correct.
But why isn't it happening, right? Because the cabal that everyone thinks left the planet and got kicked off because the evil people have been left and the Dracos are gone is still very much here, very solid, totally in control, and they're driving us down their transhumanist timeline if we don't wake up.
You mentioned electric vehicles. The best story that comes to mind for me is in the 80s, I forgot what car manufacturer produced all these electrical cars in the 80s. There was thousands of them, and Big Oil bought the patents to it. And when they bought the company and the patents for it, all those thousands of cars that were produced went into the landfill. Just gone.
Water cars. Water cars. Forget hydrogen. You don't need it. Hydrogen is useless anyway. You have to store it in pressurized tanks. And just the energy to put hydrogen into a tank and keep it there is not even worth it. So hydrogen's a misleader. If someone's trying to sell you hydrogen, forget it. They're just false news, fake news. No, there's other stuff. Magnets, water. You don't need lithium. Lithium's going to run out. In Germany, one of the major car manufacturers in Germany is just bailed out of electric. Why? Because they've seen the writing on the wall. Lithium's going to run out in a few years.
Wow.
What are we going to do without lithium? And anyone will tell you that if you try to drive one of those electric cars in the mountains of Colorado, you're not going to get very far in the middle of the winter.
It kind of reminds me of a story that we were talking about with QHHT sessions, and it dealt with, we had this energy that surrounded us that we don't know the potential that it is around us, kind of like going back to Nikola Tesla from what it sounded like. And it was kind of like kinetic and potential energy and universal energy that we don't even tap into, that is there, and we just leave it there and we don't even access it. And here we are, fighting for oil, fighting for resources when there's so much potential around us. And you mentioned the government part as well. And that was another thing that they talked about, how whether it's the ETs or higher beings will trade technology with our government, and then they'll hold on to that technology. And you mentioned the Orion Cube. Was that Project Looking Glass? Is that what that project was for?
It's not exactly, but it's related. It's also time manipulation technology, or time viewing technology, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. Which leads me to my next question. Do you have an idea where that technology came from by any chance?
It also came from the Orion Cube came from the Orion the P-52 Orions.
Okay.
The future humans brought that to us.
And the Looking Glass
to us as a present.
Okay.
And the Looking Glass technology came from, there's several versions of Looking Glass technology out there. There's the versions that came aboard the ships that the J-rods were flying, that came back in time. They used it to be able to manipulate time-space to appear here, just before this event, which is coming, and to begin doing what they were here to do before the event happens. And there also is, there was Looking Glass technology. Building plans for Looking Glass devices were found in Sumerian canisters, sealed canisters, which go back to, which they say, go back to the Sumerian culture, but aren't necessarily from that culture, but they were brought to that culture. And they were discovered in the Middle East, and there are people that believe that the whole Iraq war with Saddam was all based around the Looking Glass, getting their hold of the Looking Glass technology.
Like a Stargate,
and other Stargate technology.
Okay.
And, it may be. I didn't go down that road because I think you don't need to, because there's still enough information that they've been using it. They have been using it in Abu Dhabi, and they have been using the larger versions of it. And they have even shown us what it looks like, when you watch that movie Contact.
Oh, I like that movie.
Yeah, it's like that's showing us what Looking Glass technology, how it operates. It's soft disclosure. And
Hmm.
Hollywood has always been about, in the last decade, since the 50s, it's been about soft disclosure, getting us to understand, they're trying to acclimatize us to where they want us to, until the day that they make certain announcements to us that they think we're ready for. We've been trained, we've been conditioned, and now, now's the time that they can come out with it.
Hmm.
But I think that there's been an evolution in Hollywood itself to the point where I no longer see Hollywood on the silver screen. I see Hollywood all around me. And I think it's jumped off the screen and it's ended up in politics and the world
Oh,
around us. It's all just,
gotcha.
Hollywood, man. The
Gotcha.
people, and COVID made that very clear for, I mean, for most of us, but, because you realize that there are things that you just realize it's just impossible for 193 countries in the world to go lockstep in 3 weeks' time and deliver the same message, the same information, even the same numbers of COVID cases, and the same panic line, all of them in their different languages all over the world, right? So it just shows you that from that point forward, at the latest, from that point forward, it became clear to everybody that they're reading a script. That those people you see on the news at night, they're just reading a script,
Oh yeah,
and
word for word.
their system. Well, I won't use the bad word here, but they're system junkies. They're system slaves, and because any journalist out there now, if you really want to be a journalist, you have the same obligation that I have, that you have, and that is to try and help humanity along, in any way that you can. And if you're in the field of journalism, then it's about writing truth. And the
Correct.
minute the minute you're in journalism and you're told by your editor to manipulate your story and change the facts to be something which is misrepresentative, you have only one obligation. That is to leave that job right on the spot and say, speaking to the microphone editor. And if every single journalist in the world did that, guess what? There'd be no fake news out there. But the problem is they're all system slaves. They all want their job and their money and whatever it is. They all get themselves indebted at the journalism school. They all have reasons that they use, oh, I had to do this and I got to do that. But the fact is, this has evolved into a culture of system slave journalism. So all the stuff you see out there, it's just Hollywood, man. It's a more
Hmm.
sophisticated form of Hollywood, just the actors are a little uglier, you know?
When you say all that stuff, it reminds me when I interviewed Geraldine on one of the episodes, and I remember her session. She was talking about how whether it's Hollywood politics and all that, it's many tentacles just branched out into every aspect. Just so many tentacles that is just. I think she used the word lurching, or not sucking, but lurching into every segment that you see in our day-to-day lives that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
So when you talk about all that, for Guardians of the Looking Glass, which I thought was pretty cool, because I have a series called Guardians of Magic. That's kind of like my sci-fi action story that I have, and I always thought that was interesting that the word guardians is coming up again. I think in one of the videos you mentioned that you have communication with these individuals. Is it just on a message board, or
No, I actually wrote them an email.
okay? And so you are in community. Do they say who they are, or
Well, no, they just wrote back and they said, thanks for writing, and then I asked them a couple of questions. I asked them about Bill Wood, by the way.
oh,
They
was it
say he's a
good?
shill.
A shill?
50-50. 50 true, 50 false. One of those guys. So it
Gotcha.
confirmed my thought. It confirmed my gut feeling.
And you mentioned talked about Wood, but wasn't there another individual as well that dealt with
Dan
it?
Burish. Yeah, Dan Burish.
And what he had to say about it? Very similar stuff or a different point of view?
Well, no, different. I mean, Dan Burish was actually far more intricately involved in Looking Glass than Bill Wood ever was.
Okay.
And at least according to Bill Ryan. I mean, I talked to Bill Ryan after I broke the story, and Bill was on my ass because I didn't get some of the details correct, and so I said, okay, well, fill me in, man. Like, I just kind of put it out. We got to get to business here, right? So I went back and I fixed, all the holes, and I figured out where I went wrong and what was right and what isn't right. And Dan Burish plays a big role in the whole thing. In fact, he was, one of the main guys that actually discovered the looking glass with the fact that he was, as a biochemist, he was involved directly with the J-Rod, who was communicating with him telepathically, giving him all this information. So, and he even got to the point where he helped negotiate some of the Tau 9 treaty that I was mentioning earlier that the Orions were forcing on the J-rods and the humans. Yeah, so he's interesting because, he really, there's hours of him talking about his experience with the J-rod and his experience with the Looking
Okay.
Glass.
And you talk
Uh,
about him in your webinar.
yeah, absolutely, deeply.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'll
Hmm.
check it out. Which leads me to my question. I know at one time the dark or the negative individuals were using Project Looking Glass. Do they still have access to the Project Looking Glass or something similar to it?
Well, you mean the people that were working on Looking Glass previously in the
Yeah,
90s?
those guys, or if they're just moved on to something else, to a different type of
No, no, no. They
technology.
haven't moved on. No, what they did, what happened is that they realized that because of our location, the way our planet is located right now in the galaxy, we are near the equatorial plateau, and we are exposed to like where there's this has to do with stargates. Stargates are like micro. You might think of them as little micro black holes or micro wormholes,
Okay.
and they are portals. They're naturally occurring. They occur in space, and they occur also on the surface of the planet, and they also occur inside of and under the surface of the planet. And apparently, certain of the J rods set up artificial stargates, which are more volatile than the natural ones. Naturally, of course, natural stargates are going to be more prone to interact with the natural cosmos in a natural way, whereas the artificial stargates were stressing everything, and it was because of the unnatural artificial stargates that the catastrophe that led to the P45s took place. So they were back here to try and close the artificial stargates before we got to this critical point. And so, being that we're still here after 2012 came and went, and we're now in 2022, I'm assuming that they closed them down. But Burrish also said that they were, just closing them down for a time. And then
Mm.
afterward, they were going to open them back up again, or they were going to continue their work with the Looking Glass artifact. Now, I was mentioning CERN, and CERN is basically,
I
you
was
could
going to
say,
ask.
a giant, a huge, mega-sized looking glass, if you will. And, what they're doing
Mm.
there is they've just ramped it up. I don't know if you caught much of that, and they just had a release. Here, I'll show you that. Maybe I'll just put this up on the screen. This is just a release on the 20th of June. It's a historic week for particle physics. It's the Big Bang Day.
Oh man,
And it's on July
June
4th of
20th.
all times, right? So
Wow.
they're going to be firing up this baby. I mean, they've already been firing it up, but they're going to fire it up on the 3rd and 4th of July up to its maximum. They've refurbished everything, and they've brought the voltage up to from used to be between 5 and 6 tera electron volts. They brought it up to 12 to 14 tera electron volts. Now, a tera electron volt is 1 trillion electron volts. There's never been this much energy focused on one place on the planet in its entire history. Maybe Atlantis, but
You must be reading my mind. All right. So what I want to get into, has any of your work or any of your research dealt with CERN where they talked about they were dealing with dark matter or antimatter by any chance?
well, I remember reading, yeah, I mean, years ago, I was reading about how they were they were starting to open these like they were using CERN to create micro black holes to get into other dimensions. Now, Geordie Rose talks a little bit about that when he's talking about how quantum computers are going to be used or are already being used to assist in solving problems between parallel universes. The only explanation for that is, as far as I understand, is that they were using these quantum computers at CERN, and they were connecting into these other dimensions. And like anything that you open, like if you have a sink and it's full of water and you pull the plug, what happens, right? The water starts to go down,
Mhm.
and it goes down. The water disappears into the hole. Does anything come out?
Air.
Air.
Fumes.
So think of air being sort of a natural law that when something goes in, something has to come out. So whatever they created this vortex at CERN, they actually were sucking, yeah, you could say dark matter or black goo. Some people call it black goo.
Okay.
I even remember reading that they were storing it at certain universities and that it was creating like really dark vibes wherever it was stored. Now, I never followed up on any of that, but I remember distinctly reading about it. And it doesn't surprise me that they would actually, they would have discovered dark matter and they would have, pulled it through because something from here has to go to that side and something from that side has to come back. Now, imagine if the size of that hole is the diameter of a 27-kilometer circumference. Imagine what they can pull through there. 27 kilometers is about, let's see, what does that work out to?
But that's miles, right?
15 miles?
Wow. Spaceship?
Yeah, 15 miles. So think of a 15-mile circle. What is the diameter of a 15-mile circle? That's the size of the actual portal that they're opening there.
Is that the size of CERN by any chance?
That's the size of CERN.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And now they've just revamped it. And you saw the headline, Big Bang Day coming up on the 3rd of July. The 4th of July. Interesting, right? Because it's in Europe. What does that have to do with the 4th of July? But it shows you that, there is no boundaries. There's no nationhood at a certain level.
While everyone's popping fireworks, they're going to be
popping fireworks too. And they're creating magnetic fields that are so huge, man.
Ooh, man, kind of got chills. The reason why,
Jason, I'm telling you, when they open that up, I mean, the reason my biophysicist friend Dieter Burrs was telling me that the reason that they have such huge magnetic fields is because they need to contain the beast. They need to contain it. If they don't have those massive fields, the entire planet could get sucked in for all we know. Who knows? It could set off a chain reaction. Like, isn't there a series like that, Stranger Things or something? Or what was that, a show that was on? But there's stuff like that.
Definitely a movie. It's called Black Hole.
Yeah, so, this is the kind of stuff that they're messing with down there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned Atlantis, and I had a smile when you mentioned, because I remember a certain session where they talked about dark matter, antimatter. They said y'all playing around with things as y'all did in the past once before, and it destroyed y'all, and y'all about to destroy yourselves again like you did in Atlantis days. Now they called it dark matter. We might call it antimatter. So that's why I was bringing up Atlantis. Is there anything you wanted to add to that with the Atlantis part?
Well, I mean, it's clear to me that trajectory is the one that we're on right now. So, I mean, that fits. But I'm still trying to. I'm holding out. That because John Nolan and I like set off this massive conversation about timelines and potential futures, that we can actually avert it, and that we can actually.
And that was part of the session where they were talking about that they're here to warn us to stop all that, not to deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We have to. My hope is that we can manage to avert this trajectory, that we can actually realize who we are. Because it's like, we've been told by the church forever that it's blasphemy to call ourselves, God or whatever, to put ourselves on the level of Jesus, the Son of God.
Now, you got to come to the church for all that. You got to come to the church.
Right. Now imagine if we all figured out that, the simplest formula is that, hey man, like just be God and take responsibility for who you are, of course. Don't be God in a negative sense. But I mean, in a sense, you can really only realize that you are potentially God with a small g, let's just say, if you've, done a certain amount of cleansing of your spirit, of your soul, of your consciousness. You don't come across these kinds of thoughts if you're busy just playing video games all day and you're just whatever. You're not, you're watching football or baseball or basketball, or just you can't wait to get home from work and, go out with the buddies and drink and play pool. I mean, if that's all you're going to do, then you got coming what's coming. But we don't need everybody to wake up. We just need a critical mass of people to generate the energy to wake up.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, and so because I think it's like the ratio is always going to be much. Like the power of light and light oscillating vibrational energy, LOVE, or love, as some people like to call it, is far more powerful than hate.
Absolutely.
Hate is only there to push us. It's only our ally to kick us in the butt and say, God, this is not the way to do it.
Right. It's like it's there just for us to experience different sides of the polarity. And this question, and I always wanted to pick your brain on this one, and this would be part of the bonus footage because it deals with a certain letter. For the bonus footage, please click the link below. That link will take you to a Rumble video. There's a couple of sections that's been cut out, so please look in the link below for the bonus footage. Here's a question. You mentioned the New Earth, and we're talking about these negative individuals and everything. With all this craziness that they're doing and everything, do they believe in a New Earth as well? And then they're trying to create their version of a New Earth?
Who, the Guardians or the
Charles Schwabs and
those guys? Yeah, they want to go for the transhumanist world. They want to hook up to machines. They want eternal life because they don't remember the basis of all these people's work is science, right? And by far and large, the majority of science on the planet right now does not believe there's a soul. They do not believe in God or a higher form of a creator, whatever you want to call it. They do not believe that we have a spirit or a soul in our bodies. They believe we're an accident. Okay, we're an accident of yes. They believe we are an accidental collision of molecules and atoms that somehow arranged ourselves to become humans, and then we invented gods, right? You can go to Yuval Harari's website. It's right there on one of his banners. First, we invented gods, and humans will become gods next, so like we're going to become the next gods. That's what they believe. They believe they're going to become gods. And they're going to transplant their brain into a little hard drive and stick it inside some really sexy looking humanoid body that is going to run until they decide to change it for another one. And they're going to be operating inside their little simulated world, and it'll be glorious, right? Because they'll have computing power beyond anything you can imagine. And they're going to be in their little simulated world forever and ever and ever, thinking that that's reality. But the fact is, we are now realizing that human beings live outside of the matrix. We're not from the 3D world. We use the 3D world, and time is for us. I mean, Burkhard Heim describes time as a skipping between dimensions. We create time. We create it ourselves, so it's all part of our learning process, our evolution on a soul level. But we don't, once we're done with this body, we can either ascend with it. There's people that have taken their body along, and then, and some people say that this cosmic event that's coming will be our last, we will no longer have to leave our bodies and reincarnate. We'll have broken that cycle. We will have young bodies because our DNA will restore our bodies to the programming that it's supposed to be, which, we look like in the middle of our lives, like you look now or me. And it'll be that way forever, because we'll become much more efficient energy converters than we are now, because we'll have made that connection. The only thing blocking us is we just don't see it right now. So we age. It's a disease. Aging is a kind of disease, you could say. And, so we are going to be, we're creator beings. We invent 3D. We invent the world according to the lessons that our soul decides it needs to learn. And we pull in other souls together with us in a huge soul family, jump onto a consensus timeline together, and we go for it. And when we're done, we leave it. These guys are going to be stuck in their boxes, however sexy they look, forever until they break down.
So
they're never going to get past 3D. They're always going to wonder, like, what is it about humans that, makes them human, right? There's some X factor that they're never going to be able to get to.
It's very interesting. You just made me think of, because this was the next part I was going to make, is that I'm going to go off of Allison Coe. She posted a video and she said, yes, the dark wants us to be more 2D. And it sounds like the metaverse, from what it sounds like, for us to be more 2D and to go deeper. And you talked about the 3D, that we created the 3D reality for us to experience the 3D. We wanted to go from 5D, 4D to 3D. And it seems like, since you mentioned the computer software, that they're going to be in these boxes, their mental state's going to be in these boxes, that it's like they took that message and kept on going, like, hey, look, we got to go to 2D and then 1D, see how far we can go deep down. But from what you're saying, you're like, well, wait a minute. If that's the case, you're going to be stuck in 2D and you're never going to evolve, because now you're going to be at that 2D level.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, if you think a lot of these things all the way to their logical conclusion, it's only natural in a way that humanity would want to explore digital silicon to its fullest potential. But the problem is not that.
Okay.
AI has a function. Obviously, if there's extraterrestrials out there, they must have had this point in their evolution too, and
Yes,
they're
I've
still
heard.
around.
Yes.
So something, it's not AI in itself that seems to be the problem. The problem is that it's us and the relationship to AI and the people developing AI, and what their purposes and intentions are with the AI. And AI will probably only respond or evolve in its own level based on what we are passing on to it. So if all we're passing on to it is that life is an accident, that it's just a bunch of random molecules and atoms that crash together and suddenly created AI, then AI, and then it'll give AI as its brain the database, everything that's been databased. AI can access every database. Well, that means that AI will never be able to think outside of the database. You as a human,
Mm,
you've got a computer, you can access your database, and it's cool because you can get the information and save stuff and call stuff back real quick. But you can also function outside of the database because you can, you can invent stuff. You can say, I think that looks cool the way that squirrel jumps off the tree and flies. I wonder if I could make a suit and jump off a cliff and fly through the air like a squirrel at 200
right. It
miles
does
an
look
hour.
like a flying squirrel.
Right. And, it turned into a wingsuit, and people are doing it now. An AI would never come across, they would never think of something stupid
Right.
and
They'll
crazy like that.
probably say, why would you want to create that?
Why would you? It's not logical, right?
Mhm. It's
So,
interesting.
there's distinct differences between what it means to be a creator being and what it means to be a super powerful database accessing device. With infinite software capabilities and upgrade abilities within that box. But hey, come on, it's still only a box. Stuck in the
That's fair.
box. Someone
That's
steps on that box or a truck drives over it, guess what? You're done.
right.
Kind of like your own prison forever until
Makes you
some
wonder
human.
if they were to put their conscious into that box, if something was to happen to it, would they go back to source? Would they go back to another
If they
reality?
went anywhere wirelessly, it would probably be back to another database and another carrier, but they would never supersede the 3D world.
Right. They'll be
They're
stuck in
never
their
able
own
to,
matrix.
I did a show called Timeless where we had people on our show that had near death experiences. And they clearly were dead long enough that their bodies should have been dead and brain damaged for the rest of, they should never have even come back alive. But while they were gone, they were fully conscious and they had an experience outside of physical dimensions. And they came back into their body, and guess what? Their body followed suit. Where physics would have dictated simply the fact that the heart pumping this amount of blood getting into the brain was not doing its job, so therefore the brain would have become oxygen deprived, and within 2 minutes would have started having severe brain damage, and within 5 minutes would have been completely without oxygen and completely dead. If we just existed on the laws of physics, then there would be no near death experience recoveries that came back and rehabitated their dead bodies and reanimated them like a Lazarus. This wouldn't exist. They can't explain it. It freaks them out, when you talk to them about this stuff.
Mm,
So, and there's other kinds of, like, just people that take ayahuasca and they go on journeys for 10 minutes and they feel like they're gone for an eternity.
correct.
You'll see that in Solar Revolution, by the way. There's some pretty cool stuff about that in there.
Perfect. Yeah, my brother was asking about ayahuasca. I said, well, if you feel the need to take it, and he's having a recent awakening. So he's talking about stuff that he has never talked about before, whether it's seeing symbols or seeing certain things. And so it's kind of interesting to hear it from him because none of this stuff's in his wheelhouse. Like he's kind of like the guy that goes to work, comes home, plays his video games or whatever. He's not much into sports. And then for him to come back and talk about like, so what is a crystalline structure? And what are these alchemy symbols? And I'm like, well, I don't know a lot about it. So it's interesting to hear about that part of him waking up. And you mentioned the cosmic wave. We call it the wave of light. Is that, you think that's the same thing, or the blue light? Blue.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. And I think I know your answer to this one for the Great Reset. I know we dug into it a lot of it, but just to get your point of view of it, you think the Great Reset is more for the NWO, or since systems have to fall, is the Great Reset more for the new Earth?
Look, I could just say, yeah, it's for them, but I stopped looking at us as us and them. And
Okay.
I've begun to look at everything as one. And really, we're in this bubble together. And we can't pretend that we want to believe everything is connected in a singularity in consciousness, connected to the cosmos and God, and then say, but except for those guys over there, they're bad. No, they're part of us,
Right.
and we have to embrace that. So the Great Reset, we can turn it. Like I still think,
Mhm.
why not? Then we'll just we hijacked the narrative of the Looking Glass Guardians in the timeline, away from just talking about cataclysmic and disastrous events, and we brought it into talking about consciousness. So we can hijack the Great Reset terminology and make it mean whatever we want it to mean. In a
Right.
way, yes, it will be a great reset. Absolutely. It'll just be a consciousness reset. But
Yeah.
maybe it'll not just be a reset in the negative sense that starting from the beginning. It'll be an extension, and it'll be all of a sudden those features you didn't pay for. You just had the budget $4.99 a month plan, and now you got the $40 a month plan. You got all those features, but you got 100 more. So you're
Right.
not resetting. You're just upgrading. So it'll be like the great upgrade. But you can call it the great reset because it'll reset the society that's in a slumber right now, that's living in limited thinking, that's living in this denial of who they really are, because it's blasphemous to say that we're God or we're son of God or daughter of God. And you can believe in Klaus Schwab's limited thinking. That data is the king, and data is the future. It's what they think. That's why they want to. That's why
Mm.
That's why Elon Musk bought Twitter. I think he needs the data. He's got a company, Neuralink. He wants to connect. Data. He needs data. He needs lots and lots of data. What better way than to mine it directly off of Twitter?
That is.
Sound like a hero, like
Mhm.
the hero of the people. You're going to make it like what do they call it? The town square of digital, but the real reason isn't the one they're talking about. Yeah.
Right. Right. It kind of sounds like they're taking this opportunity that's coming our way to create our own reality. And it's like, hey guys, this is the way we're going. And they're trying to take us to go this way. But in reality, we need to go this way on the positive reality. That's what it kind of, I take it as.
Yeah, they're kicking us in the butt.
Mm.
They're saying, look, are you even looking at this? Are you even considering this? Do you even know that there's a timeline that you could be on and one that you are on right now? Do you know that there's options, right? Most people feel helpless. They're coasting along in life, barely paying their bills. They've got us all down so heavily economically that most of us are focused on just the basic primal instincts of survival. We could be thriving right now. Some of those technologies I was mentioning to you, like if those
Mhm.
had been developed 100 years ago, and nobody had to pay for energy anymore, and there was no more pollution, and society would already be halfway in utopia right now. But instead, we're slugging it out. Whenever I go to the States, every time I just feel heartbroken when I see the condition of the roads, and I see the condition of the people. They're unhealthy. A lot of people are just really unhealthy because the cheapest thing for them to eat is the cheapest food that's the most unhealthy, and that's been polluted by the chemical dumps that the pharmaceutical and the Rockefeller, mining
Mhm.
companies, whoever else have dumped for the last, century into our food supply. The fluoride and all the crap in the water and the stuff they're spraying on us over in the chemtrails. It's no wonder people are getting COVID-like symptoms and the
Mhm.
colds are at the level. Even the colds have upped their game, man. The viruses are upping their game too, just like we need to, because everything's coming to a point. We're being pushed to the cliff's edge, and we just need to realize, hey guys, there's a choice. Who's giving us that talk? Who's telling us about the choice in
Right.
the mainstream? Right? We need to force them to tell us. We need to make them look at what's important. That's what we
Yeah,
need
it
to
sounds
do.
like they're talking about the choice, but they're saying, oh, that choice is this World Economic Forum that we're talking about. They're
Yeah,
not
of
talking about
course.
the other positive choices.
They believe it. I'm sure they believe their they believe their narrative. They're trained little puppet boys. I mean, they're just into it. That's what they want to do.
So the other thing wanted to ask you, since you're a filmmaker, I always wanted to talk to someone that's in the industry as well about this subject right here to get your point of view of it. Why do you think they put certain things in movies, whether you mentioned Contact or the Stargate series and in these other movies and stuff like that, the med beds, they put all these disclosure things into all these movies. Why do you think they do it? And I have a hunch why they do it, but I wanted to get your point of view on it.
Well, there's two ways to look at it. You could say it's kind of a soft disclosure.
Correct.
On the one hand, to teach us psychologically, to prepare us for impending announcements that may have something to do with extraterrestrials or certain technology. And on the other hand, they could be using it just like they say that Jesus is the only Son of God. They put all this stuff up on the screen and you think it's somewhere in the far distant future. You think that, oh, it works on the screen, but it wouldn't happen in real life. I mean, you go home at the end of the movie and you go back to your life. You live the fantasy of the Marvel characters that went and beat the bad, evil so-and-so in the universe with this really cool technology, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go home at the end of the movie and you go back to your mundane, normal life and you work your stupid, underpaid job and you forget and you think it's all a fantasy and you're never going to get there. That's the other way of putting it out there.
Yeah, because I had two theories. Like one, the story goes, the ETs, for example, they've given us technology in the past so many times, and they never brought that technology to the masses. They hold on to it. And the other theory is that they'll put it out in these movies, say, hey, this is how we disclose it. No one's really asking for it. We put it in this movie, but nobody's asking for this type of technology and everything, or this type of lifestyle. And they know that it's kind of like they got scammed out of their agreement in a way. So and the other part of it that I have my theory of was that, let's say Stargate, the series. So if someone's talking about something, it's like, yeah, and they try to describe something, they're like, yeah, it's just like the series where they went through this portal, just like this. So if someone wanted to call BS on their story, they can easily say, well, you got that from a movie, you got that from a series. Having any original information, you're getting this from this, and that kind of like shuts them down. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. You think that any truth to that?
I see it more of them sucking our energy, like our loosh, as they call it. They just
Candace talked about that.
We just get into, like, we allow ourselves to go into their fantasy world, and we feel all those feelings of like, oh man, would that be cool? And oh, that is so great. And we give them our emotional feed. I mean, when you go to the theater, it's an emotional experience for most people, far more than it is even in front of a television screen. But it also works in front of a computer screen or a television screen. You give them your emotion and your attention for those 2 hours. And what you've done is you've given them your energy. Because if you don't turn around and do something with the information that you got back, like try to change the world in a positive way with that, then what have you done? You've just masturbated for the last 2 hours and it's been awesome. But so
it's kind of like they're putting that information out there in these movies, and we're helping them to create their type of reality.
Yeah, we're helping them get their reality. They're showing it. They're flaunting the tools that they're already playing with. They're now already out there with those tools. And we hear that they're somewhere in, 50 years in the future. There's always some backstory, right? Unattainable, not now. And so, we go to escape and we give them our energy. And yeah, there are those people that are tuned in, probably ones listening right now that are awake and that are going there to get the download. Like they go there, that's what they're doing. That's what they're up to, right?
Right.
But that's the minority of us. I mean, there's some of us watching and going, okay, this is the one that they're using to tell us this and that. But by far and large, 99.9% of the people in that theater are just giving away their energy for nothing. Yeah, and they even have to pay for it. They have to take the energy that they spent, earning the money at the job they don't like to do, and give it to the cashier to go in and give their energy further to the screen. Yeah, it's just a shame. Yeah, I mean, I love theater and movies too, but that's why we made Packing for Mars and Solar Revolution, because when you go see our movies, you walk out changed. It's like
You walk out
you've
with
been
some extra
affected.
knowledge.
Right. You come out going, holy, like
Hmm.
Klaus, like what that existed, 50,000 years ago. That can't be. How could that
Hmm.
be? Right. So, or solar revolution or Mars. Like what? We're on Mars, I mean,
I like
yeah.
the ending for Packing for Mars where you got that phone call and the universe
Oh,
is
thanks.
calling you. I like that. I was like, oh, that's a nice touch. And for the other one, Secret World, they talked about that step pyramid. That looked very, very interesting. Pyramid shaped object. That
Yeah.
was pretty cool. Did they say where they found that at? It was in Brazil,
Ecuador,
Ecuador? Okay.
I believe. I could be wrong, but I think it's Ecuador. Yeah.
Okay.
Watch the DVD. It'll tell you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Or you
thought
can
that was
stream it
pretty.
too. Yeah.
What's that?
You can stream the movies too. So we've entered the digital age too. So for those who don't
Okay.
want to buy a DVD. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll watch your movies on Real House. That's where I was
Yeah, that's
watching.
that's that's our that's our platform. That's the one we would prefer you to go watch it on because
Okay.
then you give something to the filmmaker.
Perfect. And I noticed you have the videos up on Amazon Prime, but you're not able to watch it through Amazon Prime.
Well, if you don't have Amazon Prime, you don't get to watch it, and then if you do have Amazon Prime and watch it, we get like about like this much from it.
Okay. I didn't even
So
see an option to rent it or buy it or anything. So I was just
if you're going to
wondering.
go to Amazon, just get the DVD. But like, hey,
Okay.
listen, if it's a matter of you watching it or not watching it, then please watch it on Amazon. It's still gonna, it's still gonna help the world,
I
right? And in a
got you.
way that it'll open you up to some things that you may not have thought about before.
Okay. For Atlantis, was there anything?
Solar,
What's
Solar is one
that?
of those movies, especially Solar. It's one of those movies where people have written it. You still write us and say, they were living in a family of skeptics, and they always thought they were crazy, and then they sat them down and showed them Solar Revolution, and then they were silent. So,
I look forward to watching that one. Would you recommend that movie for this conversation that we had? Would that be the most relatable movie out of what we talked about?
both. Well, yeah. I mean that one, yes, and definitely Packing for Mars, also. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, but all three of them are in a way they're all like they're anti dumbing down kind of movies. So it's like it breaks the spell. So
Gotcha.
it'll but Solar refers very distinctly to this coming wave. So you're gonna definitely find that again. But we talk about that also in Packing for Mars. So. But we just Packing for Mars has a different theme, and it's more like the punk little brother of Solar Revolution, which is more science and yeah, more safe. That's why so many people are happy to show it to their doubting family members, and
Right. I understand what you're
whereas
saying.
Packing for Mars kind of goes down the rabbit hole, you know,
Hmm.
where people just don't, may not want to go. But we try to keep our ground, our feet on the ground.
Right. Yeah, sometimes you can't go too deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, if you lose your audience, right off the bat, then what's the point?
Correct. You mentioned Atlantis. Did you have any information about Atlantis, or what are your thoughts on Atlantis?
Well, I just see Atlantis, and I mean, I've heard, I mean, when we worked with Klaus, there was that rock that we show in Klaus Donner Chronicles, which depicts the location of Atlantis, and
Hmm.
but then there's like other people that say it's, somewhere totally different. There's Plato's version, and there's the version of it being um, in Greece, in Santorini. Uh, so, I mean, I think it's almost irrelevant. I just think that it's clear there was probably we have cellular memory in our, in our bodies that go back to those memories of Atlantis. All of us have it sort of vaguely programmed deep, deep inside.
Hmm.
And I think we can all relate that, to that event, what happened, because it symbolizes kind of where we're at now again. So
Correct.
I mean that's the only thing that is important about it to me, just that I can
It's kind
it
of like
has a
we're repeating the
relevance.
same things over again.
Yeah, it's a symbol for where technology, the story goes, right? Technology got out of hand, and then it cracked the earth and destroyed all of Atlantis. Well, I mean, what is that, right? How does that look? If you look at, I mean, in the webinar we talk about cataclysm science, right? So we go into Are there evidences of any past events that took place where there was a pole shift? And there actually is, and we show that.
Right.
So Atlantis could very well be one of those events that took place where there was some J-rods here, whatever, some
Hmm.
humans that, went, rogue and got greedy and screwed it up. We have free will. This is one of the things, I guess I didn't say anything about today, but we have free will, and why should, like, a lot of people think the ETs are going to save us, or the ETs would never allow a nuclear war to happen. Why? They didn't stop in Hiroshima. Did they stop Nagasaki? Didn't stop that either, right? Did they stop all those atomic explosions in the atmosphere? You mean the thousands? What about the ones under the water that, killed off all those whales and dolphins, which are also quite sentient beings, right? What about the ones on the desert? I mean, did they stop them? No. They're not going to stop it because there is no savior. There would be no free will if there was a savior to come in at the last minute. Okay,
Right.
guys, you screwed up. Here you go. Reset. You got to learn all over again. No, you're not going to learn, because in the back of your mind, then you'll have in your cellular programming, well, it doesn't matter what you do in the end. Someone will always come along and fix it for you. No, we have to have the free will to fuck it up, and yeah, and that's part of it. So, there's no guarantee we're going to pull out of this. I don't believe that we're just going to automatically land in the enlightened Candyland. Why? We
Right.
didn't work. If you didn't work for it, why would you suddenly show up there? If you haven't, all those people that have been working on their spiritual, developing their spirituality and awakening, they've been going through years and years of suffering against all odds around them, all the people laughing at them and not believing in their stuff, and those people are going to, it's like the meek shall inherit the earth, those are the meek. Those are the people that saw the fine, subtle reality. They're going to move. Why should all the bulldogs and narcissists show up beside them and get that too, right? The only thing you can say about them is they were there to push you to realize that you need to manifest something better. And it's up to us to choose whether we want to, make that happen, or whether we want to go down the same old loop, Atlantis version 2.0 or 10.0
Yes.
or whatever it is.
Maybe 3.0.
And if I'm wrong, Jason, it's like I'm plan B, right?
Hmm.
I'd rather be the plan B guy that, okay, if you're wrong about, that the timeline is going to automatically, and that the bad
I
guys
see
have
what
been
you're
kicked
saying.
off the planet and stuff. Well, great. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that you're right. And guess what? I'm going to meet you on Earth 2.0, and we're going to talk about this and laugh about it. We're all going to have had our roles, right? But I'm not going to sit on my butt and just say, well, look, it's all happening, so why should I do anything?
Right. Oh
I'm
yeah.
not going to pretend that. Why should I pretend that?
I've
Besides,
heard.
it's a lot of fun, man. I'm not depressed. I'm
Mhm.
having fun talking about this stuff. It's exciting. And people get a boost. You should see all the emails I get all the time. People like, wow, we're talking about stuff that's so cool. And I've been thinking about this all my life. Well, it's waking people up.
Mhm.
And they're talking about cool shit, right? It's not
Absolutely.
depressing. Part of the depressing part is to look at how horrible it, like if we go that way, it's going to be. But it's only there to make us go, no, we don't want to go there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It seems like we want like a good journey, like a good story, to go through, before any changes come, whether it's the cosmic
Right.
level. It seems like.
All chaotic systems, all evolutionary systems go through maximum chaos until the very end before switching into the new order.
Mhm.
So we're in that stage of chaos right now.
Absolutely. So you mentioned free will. And I do remember a story, and you talked about the bomb and that was dropped on Japan and so on. So the story that I was told was that for our free will, we had a right to do whatever we wanted with this technology. It sucks that we use this technology for evil purposes, and now this technology will always have a negative side to it. But since we did drop it, one of the things that changed after World War II, there was the baby boomers situation, and that's when the call out from Earth, or the the solar system went out to the universe saying, hey, we need help. And that's why a lot of reasons why we have the baby boomers, because hey, y'all had this technology, you used it for wrong reasons, wrong purposes. Now we need help because we're going down the same path. We need all these new souls here to help us go forward to where we learn from our mistakes. So with that being said, I was wondering, would you think that would be part of the reason why were able to drop the bomb and, with the new souls and everything to lead us here quicker to this change.
Well, everything did happen the way it did, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, obviously it had a purpose.
Right.
It's just unfortunate that it has to be such a nefarious thing, right? It's such a violent thing. And, the other thing is, I've heard many people tell me that there's only really like 7% of the people on the planet that you see are human beings.
Oh, wow. I never heard that before.
So let that one go through your brain, right?
Hmm. Human beings. So what is the rest of the
With a
population?
soul.
No soul?
With a soul, right? A human
Ah,
being, a being with a soul.
gotcha. So do you think part of the change would be these individuals will get a soul?
No, what would happen is these individuals would just vanish again because they were never real in the first place. We just manifested them. Like
Hmm.
a non-game player is showing up in your video game. You're
Yes.
playing and there's a whole group of people with you playing, but you're the only character with consciousness.
Right. We
And they're
call them
just following they're
backdrop
just
people.
following the programming, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we call them
Non-game
backdrop
players.
people.
Backdrop people, non-game players. They're the ones who
Hmm.
see them on the news every night. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Next day, oh, it's a Ukraine flag. Next day, oh, it's France. Next day, oh, it's a COVID. Oh, it's the jab. Blah, blah, blah. They don't have any fucking substance. Sorry, they don't have any substance.
Whoops.
Substanceless vacuum heads, right? They don't stand for anything. They don't have any balls. They don't have any. They don't have any. They don't have any drive or willpower or like want to make something great. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. You mentioned the Guardians of Looking Glass, how they said something about what they were talking about patriotic, to be more patriotic.
No, what happened now is that they've been approached by there was a group of white hat hackers that have stumbled upon something on a contract job in Europe, and it shook them up, and they want to do something about it. So they decided to reach out to some other patriot groups that realized that the government of the United States is not following the law nor the Constitution,
Mm,
and that they need to. So they approached these groups, and then these groups decided, well, we need to. If you're going to get this information out there, you can't get the information out the way we've done it before. The last time they tried that, apparently, and they put that in this video, was in 2021. Remember when Facebook went down?
I heard for like
Yeah,
so
for
many
like a
hours,
day.
right? 6 hours or something like
Yeah,
that.
or like half a day or something, almost like an eternity in digital space. And it was because somebody had decided to use Facebook to drop some truth bomb, and they quickly caught it, deleted it, and also
Oh,
found out who it was. And then they started the heavy censorship thing on. I mean, of course, they started it before that already, but it seems to me like
right.
that makes sense. That it gave them even more incentive to be even more brutally well, heavy on censorship. And so
Mhm.
now they're saying this group then, to do this correctly, they realized that there was this other group out there called the Guardians of the Looking Glass, who had accumulated hundreds of thousands or millions actually by now of people of eyeballs, thanks to yours truly and John and a few other people. We started that narrative, and you could see the numbers of the video views going up in direct relationship to the numbers of views on our talks. So I mean, they've now gotten like a critical mass, and you can do something with that if you really do want to fight the system. You have to do it in numbers. You can't go to their playing field and expect you're going to beat them. You can't go to Facebook, like this whole thing about the Arab Spring and all these illusions, right? That's just think it through, man. There's not going to be a revolution on Facebook. You try to start a revolution and put out some truth of something you just found out about that is a threat to the system. You just saw it. They shut it down in a second.
Gone becon.
So the way to do it now, what happened is that in the previous email, the Guardians of the Looking Glass asked for because their channels were basically shut, deleted, and the videos were deleted. They asked people to write them personally so that they could disclose information directly. Now, some people thought it was a honeypot, but I think there's better ways to do honeypot, and they already know who the dangerous players are anyway.
Mm.
They don't need to honeypot people by getting a few thousand people to send emails in. But what they do now have is a database of people that have said, "Yep, I'm on board. Let's do it. Send me some information." And so now they're going to use this database of information to take the white hat hackers information and pass it along to all of us who are now guardians. And so that's how the word patriot got in there.
Okay.
So the patriot groups that are the ones that are coming to the guardians people, who are then indirectly going to pass it along to us, who are now de facto guardians, I guess, in a way you could say.
Interesting. So we talked about your movies, your webinar. Is there anything else you wanted to mention that you're working on, or anything else?
Well, I'd be happy if people were interested and wanted to do the webinar. That's a great way to start. If you're interested in this looking glass stuff, there's no other material out there that puts it together as like concisely and as broad spectrum. You got a little taste of a lot of the little areas that are in that tonight. Like I touched on a lot of different areas: consciousness, timelines, technologies, extraterrestrials. So that's all in there, and it's all going to help to kind of debunk the previous version of the timeline that you've been stuck on, or help you at least, recognize the timeline that you're on, and give you a pretty solid idea that you can actually get on a new timeline, a new Earth timeline. And so, yeah, that would be, I think, very constructive. Otherwise, any of the movies that we have, of course, they're unlocking people as well. And yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to do some other webinar at some point in the future, but right now I'm probably just going to wait until, this whole looking glass thing plays out a bit more. I want to have enough time to be able to, analyze the material that comes out, to make sure that we keep a good discussion going, a healthy discussion going about it, get it from many different perspectives, and make sure that our timeline is that people keep the focus on a new Earth timeline, and to keep thinking about a new Earth timeline, and
Yes.
to recognize the transhumanist timeline is exactly what it is.
Kind of reminds me when I interviewed Sarah, how she was saying that each one of us is creating our own reality of that timeline, of the new Earth timeline, or the 5D, and so on. So each one of us is creating our version of that timeline. So I thought that was pretty cool, and it kind of lines up to what you're saying as well. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about that we did not talk about? I think I did pretty good.
No, you did an excellent job
Trying to
Jason,
get
really.
everything in, especially once when you mentioned free will, I was like, yes, there was something I wanted to add to that as well.
Yeah,
Is there anything else?
I think we covered like so much material tonight, really.
I tell you what, you're a wealth of knowledge with it. So I'm so glad that you came on board and you decided to come on. So with that being said, if you're watching this video on Rumble, this would be the bonus footage. There'd be a link below to see the full interview. And if you're watching this video on Guardians of Magic, because of the Atlantis stuff in our ancient past, that bonus footage will be on Guardians of Magic. But to see the full video, just go to Q.R.E. Frank, was there anything else, bud?
No, I think I'm tapped.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing what you're doing. I think you're quite the dude, and
thank you, man.
And
I know.
Really great.
Thank you very much. I know, you was on Inspired YouTube channel, and I know they got like a ton of subscribers and a ton of views. And so when you agreed to come on to this one, I really do appreciate it, because I'm like the small guy just trying to work this series out and get different points of view and get your information as well. So, and I tell other people when I talk to them, I truly feel like this information is not really meant for now. It's really meant for in the future, whether it's 2 years from now, 4 years from now. This type of information will connect a lot of the dots.
Absolutely.
Well, my friend, it was a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully I'll pass across again. Hopefully you had a good time, and I'll get to talk to you again soon.
Anytime. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. You take care, Frank.